I am going to give you my opinion before I give you a single study, because I think it is the honest order for this one. Of everything I have read on physical aging over the last few years, the muscle nobody talks about is the one I would train first. Not the legs, not the grip, the muscle sitting under your lungs right now, doing the one job you have never once thought about doing well. It is called the diaphragm. It is a dome of muscle stretched across the bottom of your rib cage, separating your chest from your belly, and it is the engine of your breathing. Roughly 70% of the air that moves in and out of you is moved by that one sheet of muscle. It contracts about 20,000 times a day. It has been doing that since before you were born, and it will do it tonight while you sleep without asking your permission. Here is the thing almost nobody says out loud. The diaphragm is a skeletal muscle. Same tissue family as your biceps, same fiber types, same rules, which means it obeys the two laws every other skeletal muscle in your body obeys. It gets weaker with age, and it gets stronger when you load it. We have spent 40 years telling people over 60 to train their legs and their grip, and in all that time we somehow left out the muscle that supplies the oxygen for everything else. This is educational, not personalized advice. If you have a lung condition, if you use oxygen, if you have uncontrolled blood pressure, this is material for a conversation with your physician before you try anything, not a replacement for one. Let us get into it. Start with the anatomy, because the shape explains the whole thing. Put your hands on the bottom of your rib cage, thumbs pointing back. The diaphragm is anchored all the way around there, and it arches upward into your chest like the top of a mushroom or like a parachute that has just caught air. When it contracts, it does not curl the way a bicep does. It flattens, it pulls down. And when that dome flattens, the space in your chest suddenly gets bigger. The pressure inside drops below the pressure of the room, and air rushes in to fill the gap. That is a breath. You did not suck air in. You made a low-pressure space, and the atmosphere did the rest. Two details about that anchoring are worth having, because they explain things you have felt in your own body without knowing why. The first is that the diaphragm does not just attach to the ribs. It sends two long tendinous legs down and grips the front of your lumbar spine. They are called the crura, and they reach as far down as the second or third lumbar vertebra. So the muscle that breathes you is bolted directly onto your lower back. That is not a metaphor. It is an anatomical fact with consequences, and it is one reason the relationship between breathing mechanics and low back pain keeps turning up in the literature. The second is the wiring, and it is genuinely strange. The nerve that drives the diaphragm, the phrenic nerve, does not come off the spinal cord near the chest, where the muscle is. It comes off high in the neck, from the third, fourth, and fifth cervical roots. There is an old teaching line for it. C, 3, 4, 5 keeps the diaphragm alive. The reason is, embryological, the muscle forms up near the neck early on, and then migrates down as you develop, dragging its nerve supply behind it like a cable. It is a small thing, but it tells you how central this muscle is. Your body built it first and moved it into place. Now hold on to the image of the dome, because it explains something the textbook diagrams never get across. Every time that dome drops, it presses down on everything underneath it, and everything underneath it is your abdomen, your liver, your gut, and critically, the large veins and the lymphatic vessels running back up toward your chest. So each breath is not just an air event, it is a pressure event. Down goes the dome, up goes the pressure in the belly, down goes the pressure in the chest, and fluid in those low-pressure vessels gets nudged along in the direction it was already trying to go. Your diaphragm is a pump that happens to also be a bellows. That is why the biggest lymphatic vessel in your body, the thoracic duct, runs right up through it. I want you to sit with what that means. 20,000 times a day, an unpaid mechanical pump moves fluid through you, and its output depends entirely on how far that dome travels. A shallow breath is a short stroke on the pump. A full one is a long stroke. And here is where age walks in. There is a phenomenon you have almost certainly heard of by now, sarcopenia, the slow loss of muscle mass and strength that starts somewhere in the fourth decade and accelerates after 60. What almost never gets said is that the respiratory muscles are not exempt. They are not sitting in some protected compartment. The diaphragm loses cross-sectional area and force-generating capacity along with everything else, and the ribcage it pulls against gets stiffer as the cartilage between the ribs calcifies. so you get a weaker pump pulling against a stiffer container. Both directions, at once. And there is a third direction that gets left out, which is the shape of the container itself. As the upper back rounds forward with age, the change most people notice first in a photograph rather than in a mirror. The lower ribs rotate down and in, and the dome of the diaphragm loses some of its arch. A dome that starts out flatter has less distance to travel when it contracts. That is not a strength problem, it is a geometry problem, and it means the same muscle produces less air movement simply because of the posture it is working from, which is, incidentally, one reason the people who tell you to sit up straight are not merely being fussy about appearance. That is the mechanism. Now, the part that made me take this seriously as more than an interesting fact. Researchers have measured respiratory muscle strength in large groups of older adults and followed them for years. Aaron Buchman and colleagues, working with a cohort of older participants, found that respiratory muscle strength predicted mortality, and it did so independently of whether the person had lung disease and independently of their general muscle strength. Read that again, because the word independently is doing enormous work. It is not simply that sick people breathe weakly and sick people die sooner. Among people with no diagnosed lung problem, how strongly they could move air still tracked with how long they lived. Related work has found the same for respiratory muscle strength and the later loss of physical function. Now, I want to be careful and honest here, because this is exactly the point where a video like this normally overreaches. That is an association, not proof of cause. It is entirely possible that respiratory muscle strength is simply an unusually good thermometer, a single number that quietly reports the condition of your whole system, the way a person's walking speed does. I think that is probably part of it. But a thermometer you can also grab and change is an unusual kind of thermometer. And that is the question the next set of studies actually went and tested. Before I get there, hold one thing because it matters in a minute. Your appointment is not going to cover any of this. There is no billing code for the state of your diaphragm. Nobody measures it, nobody charges for it, and so for most people it is simply never looked at, from birth to the end. And it is worth knowing that a measurement does exist, because that makes the absence stranger, not less strange. It is called maximal inspiratory pressure, MIP, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You breathe out, then you pull in as hard as you possibly can against a closed valve, and a gauge reads the pressure you generated. It takes under a minute. The device is not exotic. Respiratory therapists use it routinely in hospitals, and it appears constantly in the research literature as the outcome measure. It is simply not part of a normal checkup. Your blood pressure gets measured every visit for your entire adult life. The strength of the muscle that moves 70% of your air gets measured. For most people, never. I do not think there is a conspiracy in that. I think it is the ordinary inertia of what a 15-minute appointment has room for. But the practical result is the same. A modifiable variable that tracks with survival goes unlooked at for 80 years. Here is what the training research found. There is a method with an unglamorous name, inspiratory muscle strength training. The device is a small handheld thing you breathe in through, and it has a valve set to resist you, not blowing out, breathing in, against resistance. It is a dumbbell for the muscle under your lungs, and it works by exactly the principle every other dumbbell works by. Load the muscle beyond what it is used to, and it adapts. Daniel Craighead and colleagues at the University of Colorado Boulder ran a double-blind, randomized, sham-controlled trial of this and published it in the Journal of the American Heart Association in 2021. The protocol was almost comically small. 30 resisted breaths a day, 5 sets of 6, with a minute of rest between sets, about 5 minutes, 6 days a week, for 6 weeks. The comparison group did the same thing at a resistance, so low it did nothing, a genuine sham, so neither the participants nor the people measuring them knew who was who. The result? Systolic blood pressure in the trained group fell by roughly 9 millimeters of mercury, and when they brought people back 6 weeks after the training stopped, a good part of that reduction was still there. Adherence was 94%, and not a single participant dropped out, which, for anyone who has ever tried to get a group of adults to stick to an exercise program, is its own kind of finding. A later multi-trial analysis from the same group pooled several of their studies and reported the same direction of effect. Now, let me stay honest about what that does and does not mean. That is a modest trial in a specific population, midlife and older adults with above normal blood pressure. It is not proof that training your breathing muscle makes you age more slowly. I am not going to tell you that, and I would be suspicious of anyone who does. Blood pressure is also not the subject of this video, and if it is your concern, that is a conversation for the physician who knows your numbers. What that trial does prove is the thing I actually care about here. The thing everything else in this video rests on, the diaphragm response to training. It is not fixed hardware. It is a muscle, and it behaves like one, at 70 the same as at 30. 5 minutes of load changed a measurable outcome in 6 weeks. And this is not a fringe idea that arrived with one trial. Inspiratory muscle training has been used for years inside pulmonary rehabilitation and cardiac rehabilitation programs, and it has a substantial literature in patients with chronic lung disease and with heart failure, where it reliably improves inspiratory muscle strength and, in a good number of trials, exercise capacity and breathlessness. It has also been studied in athletes. The reason it never reached you is not that it failed. It is that it lived in clinical rehabilitation, where the people who need it are already sick, and nobody ever thought to carry it back across the line to healthy adults who would like to stay that way. Quick question while we are here, and I would genuinely like the answer. How old are you right now? Put the number in the comments. I ask because the reason this matters shifts a great deal between 55 and 75, and I want to know who I am talking to. Now the second half, because there is a whole other reason this muscle deserves your attention, and it has nothing to do with strength. Your diaphragm is the only part of your autonomic nervous system you can drive on purpose. Think about what that sentence means. You cannot decide to change your heart rate. You cannot decide to change your digestion, or your pupil size, or your stress hormones. All of that runs on the autonomic system, the automatic branch, and it is deliberately locked away from your conscious control, except for one door. Breathing is the single autonomic function with a manual override, and the diaphragm is the handle on that door. The mechanism is not mystical, and I want to walk you through it in plain terms because the wellness world has made it sound like magic when it is really plumbing and wiring. The vagus nerve is the main cable of the calming branch of your nervous system, the branch that slows the heart, opens up digestion, and generally tells the body the emergency is over. Stretch receptors in your lungs and pressure sensors in your major arteries feed information into that system continuously. When you breathe slowly and deeply, particularly when the exhale is longer than the inhale, you change the pattern of signals arriving on that cable. The system reads that pattern, the way it reads safety, and it responds accordingly. Reviews of the physiology of slow breathing, the work of Mark Russo and colleagues, and a large review by Andrea Zaccaro and colleagues covering the human studies on controlled slow breathing describe consistent shifts toward that calmer branch, along with changes in the beat-to-beat variability of the heart, which is one of the standard measures researchers use for autonomic balance. Here is the piece I find genuinely striking. It is not the volume of air that carries the signal, it is the rhythm. You are not calming yourself down by getting more oxygen. Your blood oxygen was almost certainly fine already. You are calming yourself down by changing the shape of a signal. Let me sharpen that, because it corrects a misconception almost everybody holds. The urge to breathe that you feel when you hold your breath is not an oxygen alarm. It is a carbon dioxide alarm. Your body is far more sensitive to rising carbon dioxide than to falling oxygen, and that is why hyperventilating fast, shallow, overbreathing makes you lightheaded and tingly. You have not taken in more useful oxygen. You have blown off carbon dioxide, changed the acidity of your blood, and narrowed the vessels going to your brain, which is worth knowing because it explains why a panicking person breathing harder and faster gets worse rather than better, and why the instruction that actually helps is to slow down and lengthen the exhale rather than to take a big breath. And chronic stress runs through this exact system. That is not a metaphor. Sustained activation of the stress branch of the nervous system over years is one of the better documented accelerants of the cellular aging process. It drives sustained cortisol exposure, low-grade inflammation, poorer sleep, and every downstream consequence of those three. If you have a lever that shifts the balance of that system, and it is free, and it takes 90 seconds, that lever is worth knowing about. There is one more place this muscle quietly matters, and it is the 8 hours you are not conscious for. Breathing does not stop at night, and it does not stay identical either Muscle tone drops during sleep, and sleep-disordered breathing becomes markedly more common with age. I am not going to walk any further down that road, because diagnosing it is a matter for a sleep study and a physician, and nothing said in a video can substitute for either. But I raise it for one reason. If you have been told you snore heavily, or you stop breathing in the night, or you wake unrefreshed no matter how long you were in bed, that is a conversation worth having with someone, because everything else in this video assumes a system that is at least basically working while you sleep, and for a meaningful minority of people over 60, it is not. So now put both halves together, because this is the actual argument of the video, and I want it stated cleanly. Your diaphragm is a muscle that weakens with age like every other muscle, that pumps fluid through you 20,000 times a day, and that is simultaneously the only manual control you have over your automatic nervous system, which means it is the rare place in the body where the mechanical and the neurological run through the same piece of tissue, and where 5 minutes of attention touches both. Now, what did the people in these studies actually do? Not what you should do what they did, so you can take it to someone who knows your situation. In the training trials, subjects used a resistance device set to a high fraction of their maximum inspiratory pressure and performed 30 resisted breaths a day in sets 6 days a week. The devices are widely available and cost about the price of a couple of restaurant meals. Someone with a lung condition, uncontrolled blood pressure, or a recent surgery needs a physician's sign-off before doing anything resisted. This is the part people skip and should not. 2 further honest notes on the resisted work, because the details matter and nobody prints them on the box. The resistance in these trials was not gentle, it was set high relative to what the person could produce, which is exactly why it counted as strength training rather than a breathing exercise. And the effect fades if you stop, the same as it does for every other muscle you have ever trained. The follow-up data showing some persistence at 6 weeks post-training is encouraging, not permanent. This is a habit, not a course of treatment. The other half costs nothing at all, and it is the one I would start with. Lie on your back with one hand flat on your chest and one on your belly. Breathe in and watch which hand moves. If it is the chest hand, you have found what a great many adults find, which is that decades of sitting, tight clothing, held stomachs, and low-grade stress have quietly retrained the breath upward into the neck and shoulder muscles, the accessory muscles, which were designed for sprinting away from something, not for a Tuesday. Practicing until the belly hand is the one that rises is not a wellness ritual. It is restoring the full stroke length of the pump. And the slow breathing pattern in the research is unglamorous and specific. A slow inhale through the nose and a longer exhale. The exhale is where the calming signal lives. If you want the smallest possible version of that, here it is. Lying down is easier than sitting, and sitting is easier than standing, so start on your back. One hand on the chest, one on the belly, 5 minutes, once a day, with no goal other than making the lower hand the one that moves. Most people who do this find that for the first week they cannot do it at all without concentrating, and that somewhere in the second week it starts happening on its own while they are thinking about something else. That crossover is the adaptation. It is the same crossover you would feel learning any other movement pattern, and it is the reason I would rather you did 5 honest minutes daily than 40 minutes on a Sunday. The recap, simple and usable. The diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, and it ages like one. Its strength tracks with survival in older adults, though that is association and not proof. It responds to training with a small daily load, 30 resisted breaths, moved a measurable outcome in 6 weeks in a controlled trial. And it is the one manual control you have over the automatic nervous system, through rhythm rather than volume. And here is the honest boundary of the whole argument, stated plainly so nobody can accuse me of hiding it. Nobody has run the study that would settle this. Nobody has trained the respiratory muscles of a large group of healthy older adults for years and followed them to see whether they lived longer or stayed independent longer. That trial does not exist. What exists is a strong mechanistic story, a consistent association with survival, and short controlled trials showing the muscle is trainable, and that training it moves at least one meaningful physiological marker. That is a good hand, it is not a proof. I would rather tell you that than sell you a certainty I do not have. No appointment is going to walk you through what we just covered. Nobody measures this muscle, and there is nothing to sell you at the end of it, which is very likely a large part of why you had never heard of it before today. Here is the reframe I will leave you with. You have been told your whole life to work on your legs so you can keep walking, and that is good advice. But every one of those steps is paid for in oxygen, and there is one muscle that does the buying. It has never had a day off, it has never been trained, and it is the only muscle in your body that will let you reach in and change how the rest of your nervous system is behaving. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, subscribing is the simplest way to tell the algorithm to put the next one in front of you. And tell me in the comments, hand on the chest, hand on the belly, which one moved first? I want to see the split.
You made it to the end? Most people don't. So here's what comes next. After 55, your cells stop repairing the way they used to. They don't stop for good. They stop being fed. That's what the Becker protocol is for. 3 short guides, 1 for each part of your day. The 7 repair foods and a 30-day plan. The 8 foods that defend your DNA. And the last hour before bed that decides how you wake up. No pills, no miracle claims. Just food you already have. All 3 are waiting just below this video.